The following discussion is not necessarily the views of all involved. The goal is to start open and honest discussion in a Christian worldview. Like all things, weigh what you hear with what you know and join us in our pursuit for the truth. Enjoy the podcast.
Oh, I 100% agree.
Really?
Absolutely.
I don't think you do.
Are you saying angels don't reproduce?
That's nothing to do with that. I don't know if I just outed myself as the most liberal person here.
Oh no, I'm losing it. I had the Paul moment and now it's going away. Oh no. We're just too close to heresy that I can't say it online.
Can't say heresy on the internet.
All right. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Second Rate Saints podcast. This is a continuation of our Genesis discussion. This time we're just covering the first creation account, so Genesis 1 to 2:4a, or sometimes just 2:3, depending on how you look at things. I'm your producer, Caleb. To my left is...
I'm Joel, and to my left is...
Colton. And to my left...
Josh, I'm staring at a key right now. To my left is Caleb.
We're back around. And so normally we get to do a little segment of what have you read, and Joel was going to do that. However, his book today is John Walton's Lost World of Genesis 1, which is like on the nose.
Yeah, it's a little much to just go right into the topic based on what you read. Yeah.
So we're just gonna work that into what we're talking about, because obviously it does. Now we're gonna have an approach where Josh is gonna go over it as a whole, kind of go through the steps. He's not gonna read the whole thing, but just summarize it, going through. And then we're gonna go through. We have a little topics that we're gonna hit on. We're gonna zoom in, discuss it, zoom out, zoom back in, discuss it, zoom out. And because Genesis is such a hotly debated topic, a lot of people have their opinions, even in this room, and it can get sometimes.
That's not pointed
We're gonna
at all.
fight.
So basically, if someone's going on a tangent, two guys are at it, but we're running out of time, I'll interrupt, or someone will interrupt and go, "Hey, we need to move along." And so if it's a little abrupt transition every now and then, forgive us. We are going to try to keep it in about an hour and a half, not all afternoon.
4 hours, yeah.
Yeah. Even though theologians discuss for much longer than this.
Oh, yeah.
Josh, take it away. Give me an outline of Genesis 1.
Okay. Well, it just so happens that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Wow.
It's described as formless and void. Darkness is over the face of the deep. I'm just reading the first part. The Spirit of God is over the waters. And then God says, let there be light. He creates light, night and day, says it's good. End of the first day. On the second day, God says, let there be an expanse. He separates the waters above from the waters below, creating the sky in the middle. Says it's good. On the third day, God separates the waters from the land, the earth, gathers the land together, calls the waters around the land sea, and then the land earth. Says it's good. On day 3, both of those happen on day 2.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah. On the land, he sprouts vegetation on the land. Sorry, that's day 3. He does that. All the fruit plants, the trees, the shrubs, ginormous trees, they all grow on the land, with the land when it appears. So that's the third day. So you've got light separated from darkness, water separated from the waters, and then the land separated from the waters, and plant life forms. Then on the fourth day, you've got the sun, moon, and stars appear. Fourth day ends, God's happy. On the fifth day, the birds swarm the skies, and the fish in the seas. The fifth day ends, God's happy. He says it's good. God says on the sixth day, let there be all the creatures and the livestock and the beasts of the field and the bugs on the land. And then as a separate tangent, he says, let us make man in our image and in our likeness, and gives them dominion over the creation. He creates them specifically with this 3-line piece. It's a little bit of a chiasm. God created the man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blesses them, tells them to be fruitful and multiply. He says, behold, I have given you every fruit tree everything to eat, but don't eat.
That's
That's number 2.
yeah.
He just
You
says,
just want to keep going.
yeah, just says, give them all the fruit trees, and then doesn't tell them about the big one. And then the 6th day ends, and then the 7th day starts. God has finished all that he has made, and he rests. And then it ends with, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created.
And markedly, day 7 doesn't end.
And day 7 doesn't end. Interesting theological note there.
That'll be a fun tool for later.
That's a surprise.
That's a
tool.
fun conversation. Yeah.
Thank you, Josh. So, as people have argued for a long time, these are days.
Yes.
Are these 24-hour periods? Are these eras?
These 24-hour periods starting off strong there, Caleb.
I don't know, man. This is one of those things, okay, to be honest with you, because I take to Colton's dismay sometimes,
What?
a more, shall we say, poetic approach?
Liberal approach? No,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, no,
poetic.
yeah. No, that's fine. I'm okay. I'm a liberal.
Function over form.
Yes. Wow, Josh has got the words. I'll normally just be like, it's fine if it's talking about a 24-hour day. It just, I don't know if it happened. That's my whole thing.
Right.
And so, do you think, like, in this text, is it meant to be 24-hour day? Does it care? What are your guys' thoughts? Tell me, Joel.
So the first thing we're tackling is if it's a 24-hour day? Okay. I don't think that there's any reason to believe it's a 24-hour day.
The word day.
Yeah, wonderful. It's one word. And it
Yeah.
doesn't... I mean, I know it's reoccurring. I know it's supposed to segment into different parts.
There was evening and there was morning.
But the fact that there's nothing to separate the day from the night until day 4 is confusing to me.
Sure.
On top of that, the only horrible proof texting I've heard is like, 1,000 years is like a day, and then we can make it longer days. And it's like, I guess it could have been 24 hours. I don't think it has to be. I don't even think that's necessarily what the text is going for.
Oh, I 100% agree.
Really?
Absolutely.
I don't think you
I am
do.
not a young Earth creationist.
Okay, cool.
No, I completely agree. The word yom
Yeah.
for day, to much people's dismay, does not necessarily have to mean a 24-hour period, especially when it's writing in a historical narrative kind of way, at least of this time.
So the Earth is slowing down. We know this, right? Which means it wouldn't even be the same length of day that we have now.
No,
Very
I'm a
specific.
unifortarian.
Very specific.
I am a unifortarian.
Oh, okay.
If it's
cool.
only 6,000 years old, though.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, because light was made in transit. Of course.
Wow, okay,
There's only...
Love the subtle dig, Joel.
The subtle digs, absolutely. No, here's the thing, is that you're disagreeing with too much when you limit it to a 24-hour period, I think. But that's my take.
Within the Bible or without the Bible?
I would say both. I would say
Okay.
it's an unnecessary restriction that you put on God. I don't know if I'm going to say on God.
Right.
On the text.
But didn't God make the Bible to be plainly read?
No.
I mean, yes, but that is one of the strong.
according to
stronger
Peter, not
arguments.
Paul's writings.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I completely agree. A lot of people will. I've heard a lot of people make the argument that the Bible is meant to be read by the everyday person. Therefore, why would God put some kind of mystery in it?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer being, it's not supposed to really be a mystery.
Well,
Yeah,
I also don't think that it's like, I want to steelman Joel's argument here.
Oh, interesting.
There's multiple uses of the word day that is not restricted to a 24-hour period, like the apocalyptic day of the Lord can mean
Absolutely.
like a larger time period.
And it can happen multiple times.
And it can happen multiple times, but it's a single day. So I think that it's not God interjecting mystery into the text. I think it's just we have to do a better job of understanding, well, what is this passage of the Bible within this genre, trying to use this word yom under its under which of the definitions is it being used as, and
I mean, like, you say I'm going back to where Colton was coming from.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry to derail your thing a little
Yeah,
bit, but
no.
hey. read by the plain person, or the
The everyday
plainly
man.
read, sorry, by
Yes.
the everyday man. That's a pretty new thing for Bibles, believe it or not. So I don't think it has to function just within that parameter.
Well,
Sure, yeah, in that wording
Do you wanna-
specifically, but
can you explain further?
So it would have been written down originally by, well, traditionally Moses, but more likely scribes, and then kept, and then passed along orally from generation to generation, right? That's how it would have been
Yeah.
laid down. So I guess in that way, it's the everyday man.
And I'm not sure if every book of the Bible follows that rule.
No, it's not every book of the Bible. It's just Genesis. It's maybe the Torah, but I'm saying just Genesis right now, right?
Sure.
But if it's their language, it wouldn't be mysterious to them that it would, that the word is used that way.
Yeah, that's fair.
sure, but
The problem comes from English readers.
Okay, yeah.
well, I don't think it even has to. But yeah, you're right. And the problem is English readers with most of the problems with the Bible. But even in that day, wouldn't the ancient Hebrews have also interpreted it as a literal day?
No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is that the word yom is used in multiple contexts. So not necessarily just for a single 24-hour period.
Yeah.
So we would have to determine first if they're using it for a singular 24-hour day in this passage.
Right.
Like, because we know that they used that word for multiple definitions of time. So we would have to first figure out, do they think that in this context the word means 24 hours? Or are they more loose with it as the original readers? Because then we have to take that into mind. That's all.
Now, there's a funny other second thing with the days. And it even came up when we were just prepping for the podcast.
Yeah.
Colton brought it up because I wrote down a little. There's parallels between the 6 days. The seventh day stands alone, and people draw different connections between them. Day 1, 2, and 3 kind of line up with day 4, 5, and 6, depending on how you're looking at it. The chart that I built is how it's like, hey, day 1, 2, and 3, it goes from desolate to become a habitable landscape. In day 3 and 4, those landscapes get filled with habitants in those specific landscapes that were made habitable in the corresponding days. So like day 1, light and darkness. Day 4, luminaries. However, I think Joel's going to talk a little bit about day 1 and light and darkness stuff. Day 2, sky and waters. Day 5, fish and fowl, birds. Day 3, land and the land and sea and vegetation is also made. And then day 6, the beasts, the animals of the field are made, and then
insects
humans.
and
Yeah,
all that stuff.
the creepy crawlies.
Yeah.
And so that there's connections there that people disagree on about how they should be connected. I know more of those connections. Colton, what have you come across? Because you mentioned that it was like, hey, not everybody agrees with us. What have you come across in that?
Well, a lot of people draw those parallelisms, which I think are hard to kind of deny. There are parallelisms there. It is supposed to be, well, how I seem to see it is that it is supposed to be the first 3 days of creation are these 3 lists of the creation of physical reality, and the second 3 being of life within it.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the 3rd day also has life within it, but
The
it's
things
not
that
super
inhabit
fair.
the spaces.
Yes, although plants inhabit the spaces too, but that's yeah.
Well, maybe in their thinking, they might have seen that as part of the earth.
Sure.
Actually, yeah, because life is always presented as God's breath, both in the wisdom literature and in Genesis 1, and our scientific mind has gone, well, plant life is obviously life, it's blah blah blah, but I can't think off the top of my head of Hebrews assuming the same idea of life to vegetation.
Well, they would have to an extent in terms of how the other ancient Near East gods were. Many of them were agricultural gods and stuff, that by worshiping them and doing that, potentially you could grow your crops. This idea of growth is an idea of life.
Yeah, there was
Sure,
something
from
there,
percent.
but there's a very different idea of life that's in beasts
Yep.
and in humans, and life that's in vegetation.
Absolutely.
And there.
But it is still life, something that has to, because even like in Mesopotamia, for example, they would have understood that ground does not necessarily equal life. That earth itself doesn't necessarily equal life, but when the gods or whatever, or the rains or whatever come, then that's what brings the life, which is the plant growth.
No, I'm merely pointing out that the let's say this higher form of
Sure.
this higher concept of life is always tied to the breath of God.
Sure, but this parallelism does require the idea that it is the empty idea, that these 3 days are empty and then these 3 days are filling of those days. Whereas the vegetation seems, at least in my opinion, to be more of a connection point, that
A blurring between the two?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that this is the start of the filling by introducing life to it, as even if lower form of life.
Well, and
Interesting.
You
Okay,
might be able
I like
to make
that.
a connection between that and the sun, moon, and stars, like the plants, like the sun, moon, and stars, because they're not alive unless the authors are taking that as celestial entities.
Which there's a good argument.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
One of the big staples of life in Genesis 1 is that for each of the days that life is mentioned, each of those things is told to reproduce to some extent, to fill the earth, whether it's the birds and the fish, the plants, not the plants, sorry, the people or the animals kind of thing. They're all told to to populate the earth.
Yeah.
Which is
Repopulate.
interesting.
Gap
repopulate.
theory.
Yeah,
We'll get there.
No.
Joel, you also mentioned stuff about like the parallel between days 1 to 3 and 4 to 6. Do you have anything to add on that?
So if we're going to hop back into the book review section, the way that Walton splits this up, and maybe this works for the vegetation problem, I was actually going to bring it up, is that the first 3 days are the creation of functions, and then the last 3 days are the functionaries, the things that they're supposed to bring forth, right? So the function of light and darkness is to separate the day from the night, which is the luminaries, right? The moon and the sun. And then the sky and the waters are supposed to be the fish and the fowl, so that's where they're supposed to be. That is the function of the sky, is to hold the birds, and the function of the waters is to hold the fish, and then the land and sea. And it's a whole thing. He has a couple of sections on it. It's a pretty major point of his argument, actually. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say there, unless we want to talk about exactly what the function of the first 3 days is.
I do like Walton's stuff.
Yeah,
on
it's good stuff.
his articulation of function and functionaries is at least unique.
I think it's decently unique. I don't see it in a ton of other stuff.
No,
But one of his ideas of functions, at least for the first day, is the creation of time. That is not necessarily light and darkness that's created, but it's time as observable to the human eye, I guess it makes sense.
Do you think Moses would have been aware of that when he wrote it?
I'm not sure.
I think as a highly educated Egyptian, it's possible.
The idea of time as a concept having not started before and then having started after? I don't know. Or would this been this perception that time was eternal, but God was eternal throughout it before?
I think there's a point to be made about him being uncreated.
Yeah. Oh,
That section is left out.
I agree. Yeah. Because one of the things I would say about one of my issues with the parallelism as a poetic structure is that Genesis 1:1 is not a poetic, like it has poetry kind of within it, but it's not poetry itself.
I disagree.
It's
on that
historical
point.
narrative.
I don't know about that. I think you can argue. You can argue,
It's
and although we would
it's missing
disagree
a lot of the
about
problems.
it, I'm not sold on that idea completely. To be fair, you scored better in Hebrew than I did.
That was a long time ago.
To be fair, Hebrew scholars disagree on this point, and I don't know enough and I'm biased towards one side.
Sure, I'm probably biased towards the other.
But it's defendable as far as I can tell. I just disagree.
Sure.
That's all.
Yeah, the main points I see come up are that much like every other historical narrative, the Vav conjunction is used to connect points to points, whereas in poetry it's not used nearly as much, like by a considerable amount as far as I'm aware. It's also missing a lot of the sentence structure specifically, but also repetitions of words and I think adverbs was another one.
Well, repetitions of words is definitely clear.
There are repetitions of words for sure, but not repetitions of words within themselves to add emphasis. If two of the same word are beside each other in Hebrew, typically that means that it's an emphasization of one of them. It's like a doubling down of it.
Yeah.
Which I think does actually happen in Genesis 1, but happens a lot more, as far as I'm aware, in poetry.
Fair enough.
See, I don't see that as a point. I've seen the stuff on that, but
Sure.
just because it's not always there doesn't mean that's not what it's doing.
Sure, but
here.
if it's likely there and it's not there, then it's likely not, isn't it?
I just think there's more reasons to see it as. It can't even be poetry because there's also the polemic structure of it that we'll get into later. But I just, again, I feel like you're putting some. I don't feel like I think that you're putting borders on what could be more easily explained with reading it as poetry.
Potentially, but if it's not poetry, then isn't that the problem? Like, I could interpret a lot more and understand a lot more by it being poetry, but if it's not poetry, then it doesn't matter, does it? I'm not saying it is necessarily, just all of the arguments from the Hebrew I've heard are that is historical narrative and not poetry.
To be fair, there are a lot of scholars that now argue and use the claim primordial history.
Sure. Yeah.
In where, as a people group, they will categorize their ancestors, mixing them in. And this is going to be as liberal as crazy. I don't hold everything that I'm about to say. Many ancient Near Eastern people groups would categorize their gods, mixing them in with their creation, with different creation accounts, often drawing heroes of those accounts and villains of those accounts towards their ethnic group, explaining their relation to other ethnic groups, and that it's, as some scholars, actually a good many of scholars, argue that Genesis 1 to 11 actually functions in a very similar way to those other primordial history accounts. In which case, is it the same as a historical narrative? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know enough.
Fair enough.
There's also another note. This might have been one of the things they mentioned was in a bunch of the ancient Near Eastern cultures, Egypt, Babylon, all of them, the styles in which they write history or genealogies changes pre-deluge, pre-flood. And they will mark, the Assyrians have a lineage of their kings, and they live normal lifespans, and it says, and then the deluge happened, and then they're living 20,000 years.
Right.
And they're in Egypt, they have the same thing. Like, they'll have like a genealogy or like a history, and then the deluge happens, and then the history starts to get like a blend of the mystical and the historical. Okay. There's an interesting, I don't know what to make of it, but it's
because,
yeah,
despite the fact that I am sympathetic towards a more historical reading. Sure. Even though I'm not sure. I'm more historical, not reading. The audience would have read it as a more historical
right.
Reading. Although I'm not sure if that is hermeneutically how we ought to approach it or should approach it, based on its genre and all that. But I'm more sympathetic towards that, which I'll admit creates hermeneutical problems.
Sure.
It creates more problems for me to deal with.
What changes between, because this is actually good, I think, for the audience as well, is that what changes between interpreting as some kind of historical narrative or historical
Primordial history.
primordial history versus a poetic parallelism or something like that. Specifically, just purely structural.
I don't think you have to divide them so cleanly.
I'm not sure if the ancient world would have.
Sure. But if it's not history, then it's only structure, right?
I think they can be writing history poetically.
Absolutely. But that's what the historical narrative idea is.
Yeah, but
If you the difference being if you remove the history part of it, it becomes just structural framework hypothesis idea.
It becomes speculative history or speculative fiction.
Sure. Yeah.
Doesn't
Well, it
necessarily.
becomes fictional history, but
Yeah. Well, it becomes what you would call myth.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which is fair, but is there myth in the Bible? And that's
There's myth in the Bible. It's just people debate about it. Right. There's mythical beings. There's mythical. They mythicize heroes.
right.
There's myths in the Bible. It's just people. For starters, in the Western world, we just straight up don't like the idea of myth.
Yeah, we assume that it just means it's not true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that it's not just not true, that it's a figment of the imagination that you're not supposed to dwell on all that long, and who cares? Because it doesn't actually reflect reality, and if it does, it can only reflect reality as much as, say, Lord of the Rings or something else.
Right.
There's several decent books on the use of myth in the Bible. If I'm honest with you, I'd just put another one on my wish list today. I think Oswald writes one. The Bible Among Other Myths. I'm looking it up
Oswald Chambers?
Nope. The Bible Among the Myths.
What's it about?
This topic itself. Yeah. The Bible Among the Myths, written by John N. Oswald, unique revelation, or just ancient literature. And he interacts with this. To be honest with you, I only read part of it, and then I had to return to the library. But it's, again, another one of those books that's on my reading list. The Bible does interact with mythic stuff, not just in, let's say, Genesis 1 to 11 primordial history. But it's difficult to interact with because as soon as you say the word myth, people lose their mind.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if God reveals himself in a culture that thinks in myths, uses myths, like a culture that would use, let's say, apocalyptic literature, a poetry, I don't know if it's wrong for him to do so, to interact in using a myth.
For sure. I think a lot of the problem comes in that a lot of people assume that the Bible's written for them.
Yeah.
Which it's not.
Well,
Like, there's a lot you can take out of the Bible, but it wasn't written for you.
it's written for you, but not to you.
Sure, that's a better way
Yeah.
of putting it. Yeah. And
Yeah.
even then, the for you part is not in like a love letter sense of way where it's personal or whatever, but there's a lot of things you can take out of it that would impact your personal relationship with God in many ways.
I think it's exactly, it is intended for all times, but it was
Absolutely.
written to a,
Like the best of classics, it's timeless.
yes, exactly. Like the creator.
Well, it's written to a specific audience.
Yes.
In a language that they'll understand, with words.
Couple specific audiences.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to many specific audiences.
Yeah.
Spanning a great period of time from many different
Yeah.
authors. But it's God revealing himself in the language that they'll understand, with terms they understand, with a worldview that they understand, with even, in some instances, an ethical system that they understand,
Right.
in which God puts the foundations from that ethical system to be altered and uprooted. It's God. God reveals himself to his original audience in a way that they'll understand him. And if an original audience understands, incorporates, and, let's say, deals with primordial history and myth stuff, I'm not sure if it's an issue. I'll admit it's uncomfortable. That's where I'm personally at with it.
Interesting.
I don't know if I just outed myself as the most liberal person here.
No, if we're talking myth as in the non just wrong in terms of myth, I do believe that God absolutely interacts with the world in the culture, in the context that they're within. Part of that being this very mythical thinking of the ancient world. I do believe that. My issue is that if Genesis is or Genesis 1 specifically, is presented as a historical narrative, which is it? I don't know. I've seen a lot of people say it is. Mm-hmm. If it is, then how literal does that mean?
Yeah. We at least have to acknowledge that there is contention even amongst the best of experts over what style of literature Genesis 1 is, Genesis 1 and 2, or 1 to 11 is. We can see patterns, we can see poetry in it, and it's written historically, so it seems to be historical narrative.
Well, there's structural things in there as well that are...
Yeah. There's definitely poeticisms. There's
Yeah.
It's not clean cut either way. Like there is evidence of poetic and mythic thinking.
Absolutely. Chiasms are a good example of that.
Yeah. Joel, I want to hear more from you about the function over form.
Oh, the function over... Yeah.
Would you be able to do a few minutes on that?
What function is for the world?
Yeah, no, I got that for sure. Here, I'm just going to actually open up the book so I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. It's not my opinion, it's John Walton.
So if you listen to our last podcast, we ended up having quite a bit of debate that I don't think was ever actually resolved on the creation of the material world or the creation of the functional world. And this is kind of the separation of the physical and the supernatural, which Walton would argue is a construct of scientific thinking, which is great. I don't think he's anti-science, but I do think that he, we've already talked about it, tries to take the modern reader to a historical context. And from people that I've talked to that have critiqued Walton's work, I think sometimes his priority of taking people to the historical world to understand Scripture rather than using the theological significance of today is kind of his shortcoming, right? Overly analytical, spends too much time in the past. But his taking of functional rather than his use of function in the first 3 days.
Do you mind if I try to?
Yeah,
and then you can tell me. What's up, Josh?
Well, I was just going to ask, like, what do you mean by function?
I'll do my best to answer that question. I have not read that book personally. I've audiobooked it.
Okay.
So, to be fair, yeah.
Like secondhand reading.
It's like secondhand reading, actually, though. Yeah. John Walton's argument is that the ancient world predominantly thought in function, not in material.
Okay.
Like
what do you
why
mean?
Things happen kind of idea? Like this exists because this happens?
Yeah. They thought a lot
Cause and effect.
in causality, but in that divine sort of way, right?
Right.
The material exists so that the function is done because that is the will of the gods, right? And so Walton's argument is that the first, let's say the ancient Hebrew reading of it would be to associate these events with function first, and then he would go and not material. I'm not sold on that point personally, but he ties the ancient world concept of material exists for the function, and God sets up the functions of the universe in Genesis 1. And then the material is just assumed to follow that set pattern, that function. But that the material isn't implicit in the setting up of the function.
So what
is that accurate?
Yes, I think so.
So I understand what you're saying, because I was lost last time. What you're saying is that he's setting up. He's not saying that it's in a story where he's creating everything, but what he's doing is the ocean exists to hold living things.
Yeah.
So here's the analogy he uses, and it's come back to me now as we've been talking about it, because you did a pretty good job of explaining it. A restaurant exists.
Yes.
It doesn't function until it has a license to be a restaurant, right? So he's creating the structure within. So the function would actually be the restaurant itself, weirdly enough, in the analogy. Another one he uses is a college, right? A college is a building, but then it only has its purpose once the functionaries have been installed, right? So the functionary will be the faculty and the students, right? So the first section is him setting up that the world can continue to exist, right?
Yeah.
That there is a
wound clock.
Kind of a thing.
So continue. I'm cutting you
No,
off.
I'd love to hear
I was
what you
gonna say
think
it's like we had this discussion earlier at a Tim Hortons that a cup is not a cup unless a human uses it as a cup. A cup is also
my
a
goodness.
hammer.
Yeah, ontology.
Yeah, a cup is also a hammer if you beat somebody with it, or whatever, or a weapon. But unless you use it as that thing, it's not that thing. It's just an object. And what he's saying is that God is putting the purpose into the ocean by putting the the place for the animals,
Yeah.
giving it function by making it land and putting the animals in it.
Yes.
I think
think
that's
so.
right.
Based off of my hearing of the book, yes.
Okay.
Interesting. Sure. Like
Wait.
I don't even think I disagree with that. Like,
See, that's
at
where
all.
I'm at. No,
But how much of the material is then excluded?
No, because this also. Anyway, sorry, I'm about to get super deep into the weeds, but I just need to like express it. It's before everything exists. It's the deep, right? It's just potential chaotic ocean. As everything's there.
Okay.
Just wait. Just wait.
Don't fight him yet. I know your point on this one.
Just wait. The stuff, the potential, right? And oh no, I'm losing it. I had the Paul moment and now it's going away. Is he's taking from the random and giving it purpose? The same. Oh no, don't let this happen to me.
And how the Genesis 1:1 is also the same idea of giving function to the nothing.
No, it's all potential. It's all the idea realm, and he's pulling from the none of this. Like if you don't look at a tree, it's not a tree, or if you don't look at a cup, it's not a cup. Like if there's no observers,
Yeah.
you brought this up
Yeah.
in that conversation.
Yeah.
If there's no observers, there's no cup. It's just particles. Like you,
Absolutely.
yeah.
If you want to interpret it that, if you believe that, then yes.
Well, no. But you were saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm lost. Continue.
I'm sorry. This will come back after the
It will.
podcast, and I'm gonna love it.
I might jump into it just as you're closing.
We are. That's beautiful. I love that. I think this is actually a pretty good spot to transition now into some of the hot topics of like the very specific
Absolutely.
words that are
topic.
used. The formless and void, tovu vavohu in Hebrew. What some people then see ex nihilo creation out of, which Joel has told me that I need to tell people what ex nihilo is.
Yeah, that's probably a good.
That's
idea.
probably a good idea. He's right. Ex nihilo is just, well, the whole phrase in, is it Greek or Latin? It's
Latin.
Ex nihilo nihilo fit, which is out of nothing, nothing comes. And so when most theologians and whatever say ex nihilo, they're like, hey, creation out of nothing. It's like out of
Right.
nothing. Exit, ex nihilo, nothing. And sorry.
The purpose of that is that everything that makes something on earth makes it from material around it, whereas God can pull something out of nothing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Many people, even the majority of, let's say, most apologists and a good chunk of theologians will argue actually against what you were going on about there, Josh, in that God creates the, let's say, the chaotic deep, the formless void, the waters,
Yeah.
the deep, in Genesis 1:1, where it's in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth.
Yep.
Period. That's viewed as the first event. The
Yep.
earth is then said, and the earth was without form or void, and
Yep.
darkness covered over the face of the deep. Right? And the form or void is what is the tovu vabohu.
Yeah.
They will then argue that the whole idea is that, well, when he created the heavens and the earth, so the heavens are set, the earth is set, but right now, after that first event, right now the earth is just watery chaos, soupness.
Is the earth the deep?
Well, that's the argument there.
That the earth is the deep?
Yeah, that it has to be.
Or is it in the deep? Because he gathers the land.
The
out
earth
of the
was
deep.
without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. Sure,
Right.
it might not be explicit.
Well, no. What I mean is like, because in day 3, he gathers the land.
Well, he separates the waters,
Yep.
and then gathers the land.
Yes.
What's assumed in, well, I'd like to get where you're going.
Yeah.
What's assumed in a lot of theologians and apologists is that chaos. There's an ancient that Genesis 1:2 portrays that God created the ancient Near Eastern concept of the chaotic waters.
Say that again. Repeat that.
A lot of theologians and apologists say that Genesis 1 is a first event. Genesis 2 then describes what the earth is after that first event.
Yeah.
Therefore, Genesis 1 puts forward the idea that God is the author of the chaotic waters.
Yes, I have heard this.
Yeah, this is a common thing. For those who know, I disagree. I don't know if we want to get into that per se, but yeah, where you were going with day 3, he separates the land and the or actually he separates day 2. He separates the sky and the waters, and then he separates the land and the sea. Ancient Near Eastern cosmology has, imagine if you have a globe, like a big ball of water. Okay. And now in the middle of that water, you separate it. So now you have a sphere, a hollow sphere of water with an emptiness in the middle.
An air pocket.
An air pocket in there. And then he gathers the land in that air pocket. That's the concept of the ancient Near Eastern cosmology. If you know Lord of the Rings cosmology, then it's that.
Yeah, because so many people know a lot about.
No, specifically that. Yeah, such a nerdy thing. And so, not just in the Bible, but actually that idea of that cosmological view of this is what the universe is actually mapped out.
Yep.
Is shared all across the ancient Near East. That idea of the surrounding cosmic waters, both above, below, the sides, everywhere.
Yep.
And then there's the land that's gathered.
That's why in the flood story it says the windows of the heavens were opened up.
Yep.
The water was just from the deep emptying back into creation.
And the wells open up, and it's just that's why it's portrayed as a decreation narrative often. Does anybody else want to go on about the formless and void stuff?
I mean, Tohu Bohu is...
I mean, in other places in
chaotic chaos.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the chaos is more hidden in the face of the deep, is where you get that. It means in Hebrew, especially later on, it has more explicit ties to this is uninhabitable.
Yes.
This is desolate. This is unuseful.
Yes, because the same two words are used to describe the wilderness that the Israelites walked through after leaving Egypt.
Yeah, and when the Assyrians come in and desolate everything, and it's used for this is a wasteland.
Well, and this goes to your function over form argument, the function and the functionaries, because the words yours say void and formless
and void.
Formless and void. The unfilled and unformed.
Yeah.
So there's no shape, there's no function, like there's no thing, and then there's no thing to fill the thing.
If we go to that idea of function and functionary, yes.
But even that, it's like there's no place, and then there's no material in the place. Unfilled and unformed.
It's just the ball of water right now. There's no air pocket, and there's no land in the air pocket.
Utterly uncontrolled, yes. Desolate, like you said.
Yeah. I know that unfilled and unformed is a preferred reading by one of our professors that we all know.
Yeah.
Kind of the one he pushes for. I wonder how that would compare to how, like, say, Tiamat is described.
We're gonna get
just
there
about
at the
there?
end.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Because if you could look at the first 3 days as him forming, and then the second 3 days is him filling.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put
Going
that.
to
Absolutely. A lot of people do, yeah.
Just something in the same verse or same like subsequent verse that Josh has pointed out many times, and I just really like it, is still in verse 2. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And so the deep is, in the ancient Near Eastern concept, the untamable, chaotic waters, potential soupy chaos. But as soon as God's presence come, it's water now.
When
And
darkness
so it's defined.
in the section before, when darkness is over the deep, it's the deep. When God's over the deep, it's just water. He's by being there, it's giving definition to it.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, his presence foretells of the idea of him ascribing
Right.
definitions and differentiation, whatever.
And because this is one of the polemics, a tomb doesn't do that. It still describes it as the deep.
Right.
But we're about to get into polemics.
Before we do, when it comes to the idea of with this idea of ex nihilo, this creation out of nothing, what does, like, you did say that, like, that is the common view, that God created out of nothing, and that's what's said in it. Why should we think otherwise? Because we've been alluding to it with this idea that it's unformed, as in there's still something there.
Yeah. Other places in Scripture, particularly in the prophets, in wisdom literature, and most explicitly in John 1,
Right.
1. John 1, 1-3, actually, is let's say, the theological idea of God created all things. Anything that did exist, that has come into being, he made. And that's explicitly said. My only argument is that in here, it doesn't necessarily say that. However, I'm willing to say outright, hey, I don't know enough about the ancient Near Eastern concept of the deep. I don't know if they associated the deep, chaotic waters with concept of more like potential nothingness. I don't know. I need to read more on that. Right. I've read a lot of more, as Josh will go into, more polemical stuff. But I would need to know more about the ancient Near Eastern concepts themselves and their philosophical readings into their religious idea of the deep, chaotic waters. Yeah, because if they associate it with potential nothingness, then ex nihilo fit, like or creation of ex nihilo does fit there. I don't know.
I know a lot of people who take the I don't want to say crazy, but they take the more extreme approach that because it doesn't specify this perfect beginning, like that it does say that there was unformed, but that still means that there could have been something there, just like a lump of clay that hasn't been formed kind of idea. I don't know if we want to talk about gap theory, but that's one of the main arguments for that.
Well, that'd be a good connection to put tohu vabohu. I guess that's the controversy that comes from it, right?
Yeah.
Among many, but yes.
Among many,
There's
absolutely.
a few, yeah.
The formless and void. So it is, like you said, foundational in gap theory.
Yep.
Do you want to give a summary of what gap theory is, or myself?
You're looking at it right now. Why don't you give a summary?
Cool. So that there's a time gap of eons between Genesis 1:2 and Genesis 1:3. So during this gap, the earth became formless and void. That it wasn't always that way. And this can run into some other heresy. Some people say that there was an evil ruler over the previous earth that was Satan. Yeah, and also dinosaurs. That's a whole thing. Yeah. Is that actually a big one?
A lot of people believe that connects the two. Yeah.
That's rough.
I love
it. It's hard to call that a literal reading. It's hard to call that anything, really.
I don't think it's faithful to the text in any way.
No, well, it does. It's much like theistic evolution, this idea that God used evolution to create everything, which some people believe, some people don't. This tries in the same way to harmonize science and nature in many ways, or at least on the surface it does. Is that it seems to try to say, hey, look, there was this world before. The world was created, but it just like doesn't have the same shape and view that we have it. But dinosaurs being one of them, I brought it up because many people believe that's in the old world it was there, but not in the new world. And that in a flood or some cataclysmic disaster, it was all wiped clean, formless, void, all that, and then remade. That's the idea of trying to harmonize, but I think it's weak on both ends.
I think such a reading just is completely ignorant of the ancient Near Eastern concept of the formless void of chaos, the chaotic waters, yeah. Because that's such a big thing. And if we're going to switch into polemics now, if we're good with that, actually, we want to talk about the image of God, don't we? That's a big thing.
Yeah, I mean that might come up as its own episode in the future, but we should definitely
we should do a little bit. Then we'll shift into polemics. I'll explain the connection that I was gonna say though. Often, gods arise out of the chaotic waters. In ancient Near Eastern context, or other ancient Near Eastern creation accounts, and it is markedly different in Genesis. How God's just there.
Right.
It's like, hey, I come upon the face of the waters.
Rather than
I
that, he's
show up.
above it.
He's
Yeah.
above it, exactly. And so it's a marked difference between God and all of the other ancient Eastern deities.
Separate and greater
Yeah.
as the
And so
Yeah.
such a like the gap reading doesn't even can't
No.
even acknowledge that idea.
But then how do you do with Satan and where he was before he fell? Yeah. I'm just kidding.
unless his fall is the same time as humanity's.
Which is a wild
Paradise Lost?
reading. Well,
Which
yeah.
actually is gap theory, but kind of not really.
No, that's
No,
poetry.
Paradise Lost is awesome.
Yeah.
One before we get into polemics, which also Image of God is going to get into polemics a little bit too.
Yeah.
Both Colton and Joel have done papers on the image of God.
Yep.
And we've talked about it lightly.
There's no such thing.
That's okay.
Hard stance.
I thought we were going to be fighting on this one.
Other than where it explicitly says it, it doesn't say it.
Right. Yeah. Except for the 3 other times.
What do you think is the significance in Genesis of God making humans in his image?
Because this is such a contentious topic, do you mind if I read the few verses?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
6th day. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, over all the earth, and over every creepy thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them.
Yeah. Boys who've written the paper on it, who've done the research. Before I do my ramblings, what was your like? If you could synthesize what your like thesis was.
So I'm a little scared that we're gonna end up on the same. Like, I think it's poetry, and then Cole said, "I don't think it's poetry."
That's fine. No, I won't talk about
It does have a no. We can totally disagree with that because there is, I would argue, more of a case that it is talking about a physical representation. Although I don't think it is a physical representation, but I think the reason that a physical representation, what's the word? It's salam, which
Salem, yeah. I don't know how to pronounce it.
I don't know. It's weird that you correct
By
me.
physical representation, are you talking humanity's made in the physical image of God?
Joel, I didn't mean to correct you. I thought you said salon, and so I was confused.
Salon. No, but what it's referring to in a polemic sense was a physical image. The Ushapti of the Egyptians. Right? So
What's the Shopti of the Egyptians?
Humans are idols.
yeah, so
Yeah.
humans as the idols of God.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I
100%
totally stole
agree.
your point there, Josh, because I know that we've talked about this before.
No, this is good.
That would be the reason for it being a physical image. Although I don't think we look like God. And I think looking around, you can probably see that.
Absolutely, I 100% agree with you.
Colton.
Yes.
Saying
My
that
whole
he-
paper is on this exact topic
Then-
of being idols of God.
What does that mean? Because the average reader, the average listener is going to hear that and go, "What does that mean? Idols are bad."
Yeah.
What? What does it mean to be an idol of God? And should we not phrase it that way because of the confusion? Should we be more careful?
With most people, I try not to. However, it is a word that does fit pretty well. An idol, an ancient, an idol in the ancient Near East, as far as I'm aware, is a representation of the God who is above, kind of idea. A physical representation of the God who is above. Yes, there's a lot of, like you said, there is a lot of tied into the appearance also matters kind of thing. This physical representation of a physical being, but God is obviously not physical. So how do we have a physical representation of a spiritual being?
Well,
But I don't think that's the point.
If it's poetic. The other way that the word is translated is shadow.
Yep.
What does that mean? Because the shadow's not physical.
That is a translation of one of the words for
Yeah.
image, I think it is. Or image or likeness, I don't remember. Because there's two words being used there. God made them, let's make them in our image, in our likeness. are being interesting, but we can get into that later. But the image of God and the likeness of God, while are two different words, do seem to be used pretty interchangeably in Genesis, especially early Genesis. Let's make them in our image, in our likeness. Seth was then made in the likeness and the image of Adam. Noah, the spread the likeness of God, the image was within him kind of idea. Is that that one only mentions the likeness, but there seems to be a tying of the two words together, and like shadow is an interesting one of them, but I don't know if both words translate.
I don't think it's both of them. No, I think it's just image.
And in the research I did in terms of like why it's saying these two words is that they're both representations of different aspects of the same thing. You know how with tohu bohu it's formless and void, this unfilled, unformed. If you want to go into that way, this way would also be the likenesses in physical. Well, I don't want to say physical, but likenesses and as it is it is that image is in a reflection of that.
Okay. See,
So you want to hear the most controversial part of my paper?
Sure.
Because it got pretty bad at the end. I don't know if I still agree with it, but we'll see what happens.
Interesting.
I did just pull it up, and I'm like,
This is
that's
fun.
shouldn't have written that. No, but there's our likeness. Why do you think he uses the plural there?
I actually don't know.
Some have put forth that it has to do with headship. That because he is plural, it's also to the entirety of humanity. That there's a single image of God in humanity.
Yes.
That it's
I've
not
heard
an
that.
individual
can you
idea.
explain that, like flesh that out?
It's not exclusively Adam and Eve that
Okay.
have it. It's not exclusively you and I that have it. We don't have
Oh,
ourselves, each an image of God, but rather we're a reflection of God. And how that ties back in is that it's restored through marriage.
Oh,
That's the part I wouldn't say.
interesting. Okay.
Is because if marriage is supposed to represent man's relationship to God, or God's
that's-
relationship to his people.
That's doubled down with the whole church analogy.
Yeah, no,
marriage
it
stuff,
100% just goes into the church thing, but you're doing systematics if you pull that in.
which is fine.
Which is fine. I'm not against systematics entirely. I'm just going to finish this one point.
Yep.
Okay. That a restoration of the image of God is an invitation into the self-love of the Trinity.
Okay, yeah,
that's a very orthodox thing.
Yeah.
There.
Anyways, that's what
I don't know if I don't know if I'd write that
See,
down
that's
either.
the part that I was like, I
You
don't know
said-
if I get that.
Has each individual person doesn't have the image of God.
No, each
They do.
As
They
a
just have a
collective.
distorted version of it, which is weird because the collection of it reforms
No,
into the image.
It's
right?
not the individual part that I have a problem with. You said has,
has.
Not are.
not are.
Oh, like they
Oh.
contain the image of God rather than they are the image of God.
Yeah, because it's the pattern in which they are created in, not they have the image.
okay.
Yeah.
We could go both ways. I would still lean to has.
I see. Here we get into like. Of course, I
disagree.
didn't write the paper.
Okay.
I didn't write
Yeah.
the paper. I haven't done the research. So this is just my top of the.
Ironically, not married to this.
This
fine.
is just like my standard reading. So I could be way off base. I normally agree with what Josh is putting
On
forward
everything.
here.
No. What?
Yeah. I normally agree with what Josh is putting forward here because I have normally read the idea of being made in the image of God, right? You are the image of God. You are depending on the audience, the idol of God.
Well,
Is it explicitly tied to their role as
I was just about
rulers
to,
of the
absolutely.
earth?
Can I,
In fact,
but
I would
wanna
argue
make
that's the most important.
I want to make a
part.
specific point. It's not. So let's create man in our image. Not not with our image, but also not like let us not make man as our image.
Does it have the
It's
bait?
in our image.
Does it have the bait
yeah.
preposition?
the in is the big.
I think it is.
I'm doubling down. I'm just
I'm
going to
pretty sure
double check
it
the
is. Yeah.
Hebrew and make sure that it actually has the bait preposition. That is
It's a bunch of them.
127.
It's let us make man. There's 26.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bait preposition. In,
Yeah.
by, with, specifically.
In by with. So there's a pattern. the image of God, and he's making man in that pattern. So it's individual and corporate.
Like
Okay.
like
you
the
could
church.
argue in their 100%. I was going to mention that a bit earlier
Because he says, let us make man, like man, and then he says male and female.
Yes, it's a big important distinction. This idea that is both, which is another thing with, we brought up the our idea. Why does God say in our image? One of the main things I've seen tied to that, one second, Josh, is that man and woman being made in image is that relationship is a distinct part of being in the image of God itself.
Mm-hmm. That's
That-
cut on heavily with like social justice stuff.
Has it?
Yeah.
Well,
100%.
it's actually when we do our humanities episode, which is
Okay.
coming down the road a little bit, we'll be discussing this specific topic and how that has
Yeah.
affected where we get human rights from, and then follow that through history a bit and more social stuff. That is coming down the pipeline, by
It's
the way.
interesting because, yes, it is a big part of marriage. Sorry, Josh. I'm not meaning to cut you off, but I want to finish the thought.
Keep talking. Don't let him talk.
But I don't know how much it has to tie with, how much it ties with marriage specifically, even though it does talk about it, like right after. That is an interesting idea. But it does seem that the relationship that Adam and Eve have, that love, concept of relationship itself, might be the reason why he included the R part of that.
Unless,
you think?
Unless it's tied to ruling and having dominion, in which
Well,
case
that's
the
another
angel's
part.
reading just works.
Well, the
Right?
angels reading.
The angels reading.
Yeah, that it's like angels also have dominion. Okay, this is
Oh,
wild.
okay, now I get
You're
it,
talking
yeah.
about wild theories with that.
I don't think this is wild.
Well, mine's the more tame version of his.
Oh, hey,
but his
Josh.
is more interesting.
That if the image of God is related to dominion, rule, authority, vice regency, all of that, like sovereignty.
Yes. Oh no.
Yeah.
No. This gives credence to my other idea.
Oh no, you're right.
Josh hates being right.
No,
Sorry,
it's
what?
no.
I'm missing
we're
a
not
conversation
talking
here.
about
Yeah.
that.
It's verges too close to heresy that I can't say it online.
We'll have to edit that out.
Can't say heresy on the internet.
No, that if the image of God is explicitly tied to a being ruling, having dominion, having given a certain amount of sovereignty, then we know the angels also have that. And so it's the let us make man in our image.
I absolutely partially agree with you.
Okay,
I
cool.
don't agree that he's talking to the angels.
I don't.
Oh,
I'm not
to the
saying
angels.
I'm not saying. This is what I think.
I
I'm
thought you said you were
saying
talking
that
about angels.
if it's exclusively tied to dominion and sovereignty and vice regency and all that, you can make the claim.
that-
Are you
is-
saying angels don't reproduce?
That's nothing to do with that.
Well, no, because it's also be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah, that's a command
Right before the
specific.
But
dominion.
that's also for the animals as well.
Yeah,
You're right.
But if the image of God is specifically tied to, let's say, divinely given partial sovereignty,
Yes.
then the argument that he's talking to the angels at least has grounding.
I've
I'm not
seen-
saying it's explicitly and only tied to that. If it is, though, it works.
I talked to
disagree.
the Okay. I talked about it before. The professor that we talked about does not like that reading. I brought it up to him.
Yeah.
I said, hey, is this angels? He goes, no. Stop.
On all the research I did, it was a while since I've read this paper, so names of books I couldn't specifically mention, but every single person I read had completely disagreed with that idea.
Yeah.
Not because it goes against the idea or whatever, just it seems to not be within the text itself. This idea of angels that he's speaking to them,
Fair enough.
which I'm not meaning to just disagree. But
No, I'm not saying I agree with it. All
It
I'm
is an
saying
interesting
is,
idea.
if the image of God is solely tied to dominion, that argument stands.
So when we talk about being made in the image of God, individually, corporately, we're saying that humans. What are we saying that this
that
means?
the text means, or what it means in general.
Well, what did you say in your paper?
I wrote that it has both a mix of the physical attributes of being the idol, like you talked about,
Yes.
this idol, this representation of God on earth, both both in characteristics and in function, if we want to talk about that.
Yeah.
But one of those functions, the specific function, is being the regent of earth while God is away, while he's not on the throne.
Oh,
He is on the throne of creation above it in his rest, but man is overseeing his creation as the regent. Put in charge of like a governor of a district. Put in
Yes.
charge of it.
yes.
Not that God's just gone, but God created creation and now he puts his regent in charge.
Okay, I agree. I really didn't like your wording.
I think that it ties in a little bit with the day of rest as well.
Sure. Okay. Well, it's the idea of all kingdoms and emperors had done it not all, the majority in the ancient Near East, in Rome and in Greece. When the emperor came or when the emperor conquered a city, they made a statue of him in the middle of the city, or they made something to, hey,
Yeah.
this is the dude that rules you. And man functions similar to like a statue, like an idol of that.
Yeah.
But instead of just being a statue, he's also the governor of the city.
Yes. Like in the Egyptian sense, the Joseph at the end of Genesis is made second in command under Pharaoh, and he is put on Pharaoh's chariot, and he is given Pharaoh's regency ring, and he is paraded through the city so that people know when he does something, it's mine. He's commanding. He's being placed as the second in command, as everything that Joseph does, it's me. So
Yes.
obey him like it. And and a lot of scholars have gone to say that is at like polar ends of the Genesis text describing the image of God.
Interesting.
The way in which he becomes, because it also patterns itself into the foreshadowing of Christ. Christ is the image
Yep.
of God.
Yeah.
Second in command, everything he does, God does.
In him, the fullness of God was
Yeah.
pleased to dwell.
And then further, we're conformed to the image of Christ, the same way we're made in the image of God. Anyways, yeah.
I didn't do as much research onto New Testament ideas of image because there is
It was an
interesting-
exegetical paper.
It was an exegetical paper, but also there does seem to be a continuation of the idea of what the image of God is in that. But in what this is saying specifically, there is like this whole idea of dominion, of ruling over, I think is a pretty good argument as to the main thing or one of the main things, considering how in verse 26, God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds." He creates them in his image, and like it does seem specifically gives them, one of the big aspects of it is to give them dominion.
Yeah.
And that likeness and image seems heavily tied
He
to
also
that.
he also says that it's very good.
Yes.
Unlike everything else is good. But
Also at the pinnacle of creation.
I want to transition into polemics. Josh,
Yes.
Bible puts forward like humans are very good. Like, hey, you're made in the image of God. Hey, baby, have dominion. What is? Because sometimes humans are made out of demon goddess blood.
Sorry,
Yes.
what?
Yep.
So we've gone through the last podcast. I hit on two.
Yeah.
So to review, a polemic is a literary device that people have used throughout time, where there's an original text. Like give it a classic example. There's a politician. They release a commercial saying, "Hey, you should vote for me for all these reasons. I've hugged the baby. I take care of the poor, blah, blah, blah." And then you'll see a video of his competitor who films it the exact same way, but with slight differences. And he says, "Hey, this is why you shouldn't vote for this person because he hates babies." And
Right. He kicks puppies.
yeah. And so it's like, it's filmed the same way, but the changes are, you go, wait, that's not like it was. And that draws you in, and that focus is a truth being presented by the second person about the reality.
Well, it's a commentary on the first one, using the first
Yes.
one as a medium.
Yes. Both as a trash on the people and as the original one, and a bringing forward to a greater truth.
And in Genesis 1, we see a couple of those.
Yes. Specifically, so Genesis 1 seems to be, as we discussed in the previous passage, an amalgamation of 2 or 3 Egyptian creation stories. The Ogdode being the first 3 verses, the The first two. And there's the first line is a polemic. He says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the Ogdode, it says, on an occasion. When it just happened to be at this point in time, not
Right.
at the beginning of time. And then it also doesn't say that there's a God that's there that makes the heavens and the earth. It's just on an occasion, and then the darkness, blah, 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 covered the waters. The earth was formless and void, and undifferentiated formlessness in their wording.
And then is it Apsu that just pops up?
It is Ptah.
Ptah.
Ptah. And he is just there. He's the divine wind, Ptah. And he's with the deep. And so there's that difference. God is above, different, separate. And in the first line, he's there at the beginning of time.
Right.
Whereas Ptah is just there on a day. Yeah.
And so the author of Genesis 1 is specifically going, oh, no, but our God's better.
Yeah. Right at the beginning. This is the beginning of everything. And this guy's been here before.
Preeminent. Yeah.
Yeah. Above the water.
Yeah. Above the water, signifying the position of greater than and separate. He's not of the deep. Whereas in all the other religions, the beings come from the deep. The same way that in Daniel, the monsters rise out of the deep.
Well, there's one I'll give you a break from giving specific polemics.
Yeah.
One or two very interesting polemics that are just straight up not in either of the Genesis accounts, but more specifically the creation accounts, but more specifically the first. You have the term chaos conf, which actually is just it's a pattern that we see in creation accounts where gods create out of battling other gods. And Josh will get into a couple of specific examples, but it's very, very, very common where there's the chaotic water or there's a chaotic god and the creator god or the prime god or whatever
Right.
will battle it, destroy it, or subdue it, different variations. But they have to confront it, and there is a war or there is conflict. Super not there in Genesis.
Yeah.
God's just, and do this thing because I said so.
Yeah.
Oh, it just happens.
Yeah.
Chaos and the deep, the waters, just do as God commands. There is no challenge. There is no showing, not showing his mastery and sovereignty.
Yeah. And sadly, I can't make the connection here, but because this is relation to the Egyptian story, not the Babylonian story. So he's not polemicizing that story, but there is a connection between how Marduk speaks the magic words, defeats Tiamat, and then makes the earth. And she's described as the salt water, the chaos deep. And then God, using words, defines the deep down into reality.
John Curd in Against the Gods, actually, he doesn't go over specifics, but he does mention that there's a couple Egyptian creation accounts that do where creation is because of verbatim words.
Yes.
Although they're not, the phraseology is very, very different than the Bible. So the idea could be the same. Could be the inspiration. It's at least there in the ancient Near East when this is being made. The same culture that has creation accounts that are already being used are used, but it's not explicit. The idea is the same. The words aren't the same. So the polemic and ideas are there, but it's not as sure.
Yeah. Right. One of the other things is the word for deep in Hebrew is tehom. Which is scholars argue is the Hebrew word that comes from the root word for Tiamat. Tehom, Tiamat. Which connects thematically with the deep, dark, salt water, whatever. But there's argument, and there's no consensus.
Yeah, scholars will continue to argue about that.
Yeah. And then you've got the next line, which is... in the Genesis story, God says, "Let there be light," and there was light. Separates the darkness from the night. In the Egyptian story, light just appears in the deep, and it's the god Atum, and he's like, "I'm drowning. I can't breathe." And so he separates the waters apart so that he has an air pocket to live in. And then he gathers some land together so he has somewhere to stand, so he's not swimming constantly, because who can do that? Because apparently he's a pretty weak god.
Well, I mean, compared to Genesis 1, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he can't tread water that long. Longer than not even a few minutes, because his whole creation story happens in a day, whereas God's happens in 7.
I
Anyways,
was treading water for 7 days.
so anyways, he separates the same pattern of separating waters from waters, gathering the lands, putting vegetation on because he wanted something to eat.
Well, do you mind if I interrupt on
Yep.
that point? That's another big polemic, just in general, with more ancient Near Eastern stuff.
Yeah.
Normally, vegetation and the purpose of humanity
Yeah.
is to, hey, go get the food, grow the food, collect the food, bring the food to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where in Genesis 1, 2 to 4, is, hey, the food, you and the animals,
Yes.
have at her.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's what it's for.
Specifically, don't have to work for it, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a massive,
Yeah.
massive difference between, creation is to serve me, the gods, right?
Yes.
Whereas physical creation is presented in Genesis 1 as, no, the fruits of physical creation is for physical creation itself. It's
Yeah.
sufficient. It's
Right.
for you.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is like, anyway, so we'll get through it and then we can start analyzing the deeper aspects to the polemics. You've got the stars in the sky, but specifically he doesn't say, and the sun. He uses the word Ra. So another god appears. In fact, all of the sea, the land, all these things, they're the names of the gods in the Egyptian pantheon.
It's specifically an attack of theogony.
Yeah.
So theogony is that during creation, there is, alongside with the creation of the material thing, there's the creation of the god that corresponds with that material thing.
Yeah.
Whereas in
The Bible.
it's presented as like, it's just thing,
Yeah.
you know.
It's
Yeah.
a thing in and of itself.
And it's like, here's just an example. So I guess it's not really a material thing. It's connection to the function of that thing. Baal, god of storms, right?
Yeah.
He exists because storm exists. The cycle of Baal, his death is when the rainy season leaves. His function and his identity is tied up to the
Yes.
thing,
That is
to
created.
its function in reality.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes theogonies are beside it. Whereas, as Josh is expressing, no, there's no theogony. There's just God.
It's God creating water, light, land. It's just earth, just a bunch of dirt.
Well, he just organizes the function
Yeah.
of reality.
Yeah. And then you've got Ra. So he creates this celestial being. And then you've got him creating the animals and then the idols of the gods, the Ushabtis, on the last day, the last creation event. And so that's interesting. There's a correlation there on the last act of creation is these idols of the gods, and then what we talked about before with
Right.
the image of God being the word idol.
Right.
Again, idol's one of those words that's been abused to the point where it's
Yeah.
almost not useful anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like we need to find another word.
Representation is the word I use in my paper because
A lot of
Yeah.
people
it's
go with
not as weighted.
reflection.
Yeah.
Reflection's good
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And
Carry on. Sorry.
oh, did you have more to say on the images?
No, it's just in the previous podcast we went over like how there's some of this is there's just cosmic temple stuff, and majority of this, if you've listened
Yeah.
to the previous episode, can obviously tie in to the cosmic temple ideas. I just wanted to reference that.
Yeah.
For those who have listened to it previously, there's a lot of connections here.
Yes. But what's interesting with, I'll say the last part. So Ptah rests, and then after he rests, because he's so tired from creating, he weeps because what he loves is so beautiful. A connection to the Genesis story. He says it's good. He's like, wow, this is amazing. What just happened? And then he cries, and then the tears mix with the dirt, and humans pop up. Like,
On an accident, kind of.
yeah.
Like yeah.
And he's like, like he's like shocked by it. And then he's like, oh, we got to do something. And so the Egyptian pantheon organizes the world like like, oh, we got to take care of these guys. Like they're like us, but they're not. They're weak, but we should show them how to be. Whereas in the Enuma Elish, they're slaves. But what's interesting about the meta polemics here is like this is reactionary. The god is creating everything he needs when he just pops into existence, and then
reacts against the things around him.
Yeah, the problems he's having, the needs he has.
A problem comes up, he solves it.
Yeah. Whereas God is different.
Oh, the intention is huge. The intention
shows up.
In Genesis 1.
Yeah, he shows up and he has a plan. Like, let us make this, dividing the separations with purpose. And then you get the Enuma Elish.
Yeah.
Genesis 2.
Genesis
but that's
2,
another day.
Which is our next episode. I think we're going to talk about Genesis 2 and then Genesis 3 in a separate, because I think that would be probably wise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to all that. I know there's tons of theology in there. There's tons of debate to have in there, and we just did some light discussions on this. After all, we are just trying to encourage discussion and dialogue within the church, and this is stuff that I love and live for.
Absolutely. Any general overviews of Genesis 1? Important things to take away?
I want to be careful with what I'm about to say.
You're going to be a heretic either way.
Yeah, whether or not the material is the point of the text, the function and the thematic truth, the theological truths being presented are like, they're either equal or the theological point is above. So like either way, whether we agree on how old the earth is or did God create the world literally this way?
Did God create chaos?
Yeah. It's what is God saying about the nature of like our relationship with him, each other, the world. And those things, even though the creation of the world matters, those things I think should take precedent in what we take from Genesis on like how, like as a church, what are we going to do with Genesis?
I 100% agree. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a setup for practical theology, right? Like, this is the backdrop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like if we're made in the image of God individually and corporately, then we have to treat each other like we are.
Yeah. Also, it defines the purpose and function of how humans should live.
Yeah.
Well, it's also like this Genesis 1 is Genesis 1, 2 to 4 is the assault on any Gnostic thought. Creation is good.
Right.
It is designed by God. It has a function, and it is good. And human people in physical flesh is very good. There is no spiritual escape to some ethereal plane. This is a good thing.
Yep.
People are not accidents.
Yeah, as with the Egyptian account.
Now, I would also argue one of the big purposes, one of the big things you can take out of Genesis 1 specifically is, what does it mean to be human? What is the purpose of life? Well, this gives an idea of like, oh, yours is intrinsically tied to God and who he is and what he represents.
Yeah. Well, I think...
And your role in creation because of that.
We went over this in the previous episode too. Genesis, the first creation account definitely goes over God's relation to the cosmos as a whole, how the whole picture fits together. And then I think Genesis 2 and 3 reflects more on God's interaction with humanity. Yeah. So I'm excited to get into that for next episode. Hopefully, all you listeners can be there for the next episode. And it will hopefully go as smooth as this one. I think it went pretty smooth.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.